Hello and welcome to Views News. I'm Jawad Tehami. As we speak, the Israeli brutality in Gaza continues, with Gaza's health ministry saying that the death toll after the indiscriminate bombing by the Israeli regime since 7th of October has surpassed 40,000, with the figure now standing at 40,005. Israel's daily Haaretz, in its investigation at the same time, has also revealed that Israeli army is systematically using Palestinians as human shields. We'll be taking the analysis regarding as to what does that particular act depict, using humans as shields in a conflict zone. Also, on one side, we see the US State Department has approved $20 billion in a weapon package for Israel. And on the other side, the US is also pushing for a ceasefire deal to end the conflict in Gaza. The ceasefire negotiations were stalled after the recent assassination of Hamas's leader, Ismail Haniyeh. And now, since they have resumed, the Hamas officials had already said that they are not ready to participate in these negotiations because they want the implementation of the last 3 years proposal by the US President Joe Biden, and they want to enter into further negotiations. And after Ismail Haniyeh's assassination, there has been a fear of escalation of this particular conflict into the wider region, with the very, very strong statements coming from Iranian side. Also, some maneuvers on the part of the US, while at the same time pledging its unwavering support for the defense of Israel. Let me quickly bring in our esteemed panel of guests who are joining us in the studio as well as online. In the studio, we're honored to have been joined by Mr. Zamir Ahmad Awan, is foreign affairs expert. Mr. Awan, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Amna Mahmood, foreign affairs expert. Dr. Amna, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Also on Skype at the same time, we are honored to have been joined by Dr.Jamil Khan, his former ambassador. Dr. Khan, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Awan, let me begin with this particular revelation that has been made by Israel's daily, that Palestinians are being used systematically by Israeli military forces as human shields. What does that basically depict? What sort of a mindset is? First of all, I would like you to shed a bit of light about this phenomenon of human shields, and why would some forces retort to such brutish act?
Nobody trusts Israel, and nobody believes what Israel is saying. They are the occupational forces. It was a genuine land of Palestine. It was the Palestinian motherland, and they are occupying it. And now they are making various excuses to blame the Palestinian. Basically, this was the Palestine, and it is their land. In 1948, the creation of Israeli state was a wrong decision. In the heart of the Muslim world, that was a wrong decision. And then later on, the expansion of Israel is really a big mistake and is big blunder. And now what are they doing? They are making the new settlements, pushing the Palestinian out of their motherland, and most of them have migrated to the different countries, took the refuge to different countries, and whatever they are remaining in Palestine, still they are trying to kill them and push them.
Right. So what about this phenomenon of using Palestinians as human shields? So, Dr. Amna Mahmood, this is the Israeli daily itself claiming that there is a systematic use of Palestinians by Israeli forces as human shields. What does the international humanitarian law say about such a brutish act? Why would some forces in a conflict zone resort to using the citizens of the opposite side as human shields?
Jawad, it's a very confusing concept that what is human shield. When we talk about human shield, actually it is used by the forces, they are hiding behind those people. So in case if Israel claims that, it is not right, as Dr. Zamir Sahab mentioned, because
it's not the Israeli officials which are claiming, it is the Israeli Daily, a newspaper that has done an investigation that looks into that particular phenomenon of using Palestinians systematically on the part of Israeli forces during this particular conflict as human shields. So to what benefit would some forces, we have seen such type of examples also emanating from Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where innocent Kashmiris have been used as human shields by the Indian forces. So why would some forces use the citizens of the opposite side as human shields? What does this particular phenomenon actually depict?
I think this claim is not right, because Israel is not using them as a human shield. It is the Hamas that is actually hiding behind them, because Hamas is, they are having their installations, their presence in mostly dense areas of Gaza, and they are having civilians as the human shield, and that human shield is destroyed by Israel and its forces, IDF, because they are not sparing them, because under the international law, civilians, when they are in large number, they cannot be targeted just to target some of the terrorists or some of the opponent forces. But Israel is not taking care of that law, and they are destroying them, and they blame Hamas that they are using Palestinian as the human shield, the civilian population, and we are not having care for that. And that's why they have murdered, you know, last day they killed dozens of Palestinians. If they are using them, honoring them as human shield, they should not have identified, targeted.
Let me take this point to Dr. Jamil Khan. Dr. Jamil Khan, when you talk about this phenomenon, this brutish phenomenon of using the citizens or the people without weapons or the part of the war as human shields in a conflict zone, now this is a particular investigation that has been done by an Israeli daily that looks into this phenomenon, saying those people who have been used most of the time systematically by Israeli forces happen to be either elderly or minors. They are first pushed into those areas where Israeli regime considers those particular zones as dangerous, and they use these Palestinians to check out before heading and advancing into that particular zone. Also saying that the soldiers have given the testimonies regarding this particular thing, and the high command of Israeli forces are also aware of this particular brutish act. What's your understanding regarding this phenomenon? Why would some forces use human shields, and what does the international humanitarian law say specifically about it?
Yeah, two things. One is the fact which you have described and what is published in the Israeli newspaper. And the second is the international law. It's a fact which has been revealed by the Israeli newspaper that the Israeli soldiers are using human shields, particularly the children and the elderly, to neutralize or to reduce the risk of their going into the operation. Now, what they are doing is they are doing a handcuff of these elderly and children people above 18, of course, and then they are tying their hands behind their back, and they are making them wear Israeli uniforms, asking them to march in front of them, so that once they enter into the tunnel or once they go into the building, damaged building, they are fired upon mistakenly as the Israeli soldiers. So that is by itself against the international law, and I'll quote the exact article of international law in a while. So this is what they are doing. And then they are also installing camera on these human shields after making them wear the Israeli army uniform. Right. Now that camera is basically a surveillance camera, because they push them under the fear of a bullet from the fired from their back. If they don't walk and go into that targeted area, then they get killed by the Israeli soldiers with their weapon. And if they are going there, if there is some kind of a explosive device already installed by the Hamas forces, which of course they have the right to defend themselves as well. So they would get killed there, or they could get killed by the Hamas fire. As they would be taken as the Israeli soldiers. So that is what they have reported. Now, what is the international law? First of all, it is under the threat of their life that they are made to do that. Secondly, the international law is very clear. It is mentioned in Geneva Convention 1949, additional protocol, Article 51, that and subclause 7, that the civilian population cannot be used as a human shield. Hostage issue is altogether different, which is being discussed. That is a different matter altogether. Hostage is a different category altogether. Here we are talking in hostage or hostage kept to negotiate their demands. And I'm coming on that if you would ask me that question. But let me describe first the international law, which you have asked me to do that. Now, so that is Geneva Convention Article 51, this is the additional protocol, and Geneva Convention Article 28, which is the Hague Convention of 1907, Article 25. That is also an international law which can be invoked against the perpetrators of soldier army, which is using soldiers as the human shield. And then comes the International Criminal Court Statute 1998, in which Article 8 is invoked if this the act is done by any armed forces. And since it's in the
Dr. Jamil Khan, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. Going further into the process, once there is identification of the perpetrator of this particular crime, then the invocation of that Article 8 of ICC statute. So how does that particular accountability does happen of a perpetrator of using human shields?
The international law has already been put into motion, and the Prosecutor General of the ICC, International Criminal Court, has already applied for the arrest warrant of the Prime Minister, that is Netanyahu, and his Defense Minister. And that is now being heard by the three-member judges of the International Criminal Court, and they have no other option but to pass a judgment on it. And those judgments would now be, that is, proceeding is underway, and Israeli administration and Israeli leadership are applying all kind of tricks and tactics and pressure, diplomatic as well as other pressure on the International Criminal Court that they should not pass that judgment. Now, in all probability, the judges would not come under.
Right, Dr. Khan, if the judges don't come under any sort of pressure by the Israeli side, and if they come up with a judgment that they issue the warrant against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in that particular case, would those warrants be applicable in any way? And what would be the procedure of execution of those warrants, given the fact Israel is not the member of ICC?
No, that jurisdiction ICC has already laid down, and its prosecutors' request and the evidence has been accepted by the ICC that Israel, although not a signatory, but Palestine is a signatory and a member. So therefore, atrocities are being conducted, or whatever violation are being conducted in the territory of Israel by the Israeli soldiers or Israeli people. So that jurisdiction has been established. With our discussion, it won't change that jurisdiction. That jurisdiction is there, which the ICC has established. Now coming on, what other authorities International Criminal Court has after issuing the warrant. That's a thing very significant. In fact, the entire strength of the ICC is its member countries. And ICC jurisdiction and enforcement is done with the help of the member countries. For example, if the Prime Minister of Israel, he flies over 20 different countries, goes to United States or some other country, all those countries are morally bound and legally bound to arrest him in its airspace by sending their fighters, by sending their plane, by forcing them to land and arrest them. Or if he's seen in any of the territory of the member country, that warrant is applicable and that could be arrested. The bigger question is that those countries, do they have that much of moral courage to do that? I think Israeli Prime Minister is not going to fly over to South Africa because South Africa was the proponent of this initiative. And
going to fly to South Africa. What about the United States of America? Recently, we saw Benjamin Netanyahu going to the United States of America. If these warrants had been already issued by the ICC, and Benjamin Netanyahu would have been in the United States of America, wouldn't it have been a test case for the United States of America whether they had arrested Netanyahu or not?
There has been a criticism even from among the Congress members. This is the first time in the history of United Nations that a person against whom the prosecutor has already applied for the arrest warrant is addressing the biggest democracy of the world. So that has gone into the history, and a history which has made a black spot in the democratic history of the United States. It's not me who is making these comments. These are the comments given by some of the Congress members themselves who had boycotted it. Although he had the standing ovation and clappings more than 52 times, but still there were people who really know what the value of the democracy is and what the international value of the international law. So yes, that has been very clearly defined there. And this, I don't know how United States would get away with this black mark on the history of that. But then there is one excuse.
Your point is well taken. Let me take this very important point to Mr. Awan. Mr. Awan, when we talk about there is a likelihood of the issuance of warrants on the part of the ICC against Benjamin Netanyahu. So what, as per your understanding, could be the possible manifestation of the enforcement of that warrant? And particularly when you talk about the specific case of the United States of America, would it be normal for Israeli Prime Minister to travel to the US as it's already been there in the recent past?
Once Israel has declared to be defaulter, they have defaulted the United Nations Security Council resolution of ceasefire, and who is protecting them is America. America is the equally partner in these war crimes, and they are protecting Israel. And this is really a black spot on the history of America, democratic values of America. And the historian will forever write this black spot on American history. I mean, how they are supporting genocide in Gaza, how they are supporting Israel to default the ceasefire passed by the Security Council, and ICG's decision are not implemented. Not only America, of course, when Israeli Prime Minister traveled to America, he has fly over many other countries' aerospace, and all of them who are the signatory to ICJ, they are supposed to arrest him.
Okay, Dr. Amna, when we talk about, is there any possibility, as Dr. Jamil Khan has also mentioned, the number of media reports that suggest to the fact that Israeli officials are trying to pressurize those judges at the ICC, is there any sort of a possibility that they might succumb to the pressure of Israeli officials and perhaps not issue the warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu? And if that happens, what would that signify?
Warrants are already being issued by the first decision of ICJ. So these warrants are binding under the international law. But since we do have no sovereign power to implement international law, so it goes on the volunteer acceptance and implementation of international community. And since most of the powerful nations, 5 Ps, they are on the side of only Russia and China, they criticize in UN Security Council 24th February meeting. Otherwise, all rest 3 powers were with them, so they were not arrested. Warrants are already been issued. It would be the second time when it would be issued, and it would be through the International Criminal Court, so it would be binding again, but it would be implemented through UN Security Council. And as UN Security Council could not implement its own resolution in favor of ceasefire, so we cannot expect that it would be done. And about your question about the judges, I don't think that they would be pressurized, because international community and UN and Secretary General of UN, they are on the side of Palestine, because they have seen such unprecedented genocide and unprecedented support by the people of the world and not the governments of the West. So I don't think that they would take any pressure.
Okay, so Dr. Jamil Khan, you already alluded to the fact that there is an understanding when it comes to Israeli forces of reducing their risk of being the target, and that's why they put in the harm's way, or the probable or possible harm's way, those Palestinians as human shields. Now, the soldiers which have been involved in this particular investigation carried out by this Israeli daily talks of their understanding to justify using human shields as being having more importance to their lives as compared to the lives of the Palestinians. Quote unquote, our lives are more important than their lives. What is this?
No, these are the rhetorics and these are the excuses of violating the international law and all the human laws, humanitarian laws. So these are the excuses. That excuses cannot overcome or brush away the international law and the morality of it. So from both point, it's wrong. Um, my argument here is, and my point here is that Israel, to what extent it has so far followed the international law, at least in the known memory, whatever is decided which Israel perceives is not acceptable to them, they don't accept it. There are 42 Security Council resolutions since the inception of Israel. And out of those 42 the Security Council resolution, about 31 of them are condemning the Israel action. And there are 13 which is regarding the two-state theory, and there are some resolution related to the refugees. They are not really adhered to anyone. So the question is, what are the instruments, legal instruments, international instruments available to make Israel implement those articles and those international law? That is basically, as I was saying, there are two things. The member states have the obligation to implement, and if they don't implement it, they are violating their own signed document. Number one. Number two, the last resort to implement is the Security Council resolution implementing clause. And implementing article with the Security Council resolution is to start with Chapter 5, which would be a sanction, and they will wait whether it is being adhered to or not. And if it's not, then Chapter 7. In Chapter 7, then again there are certain articles, and there are articles available in which the defaulting country is forced, in this case Israel, which does not seem to happen, and we have to really figure it out why it does not seem to happen. And again, I will quote a very renowned author and a commentator, and his name is John Schermeyer. He says he has written a book on Israeli influence, and that describes everything why Israel is being supported by United States and its allies. To the extent that whether the international laws are broken or whether any moral laws, regardless that these on one side the negotiation for three-phase peace plan is going on, and on the other side the bombs are being loaded to replenish Israel, and $26 billion aid is being sanctioned by the Congress. So these are the dubious type of decisions in violation of the international law, which the world can see that. But why, as I said, that the laws cannot be implemented because of the Security Council veto powers. United States and its two allies have the veto powers. The other two allies, they sometimes do not agree with the United States, and they, in their wisdom, can also do the veto. So because of which none of these...
Right, Dr. Khan, there is another aspect to this particular phenomenon of human shields. Now, the Israeli army spokesperson has talked that their policy is to not to condone the use of human shields. It in fact prohibits the use of civilians as human shields, and the allegations which have come forth after this investigation, they would be further investigated within the military ranks. Do you expect any sort of a positive outcome as to the true investigation happening within the Israeli military regarding this phenomenon of using human shields?
And how could they do the confession that they are doing it? Well, I would be, any country should be very, or any individual should be quite surprised to hear these things. Of course, it should be in their knowledge, because it's if their newspaper can report it, and if it's in the general knowledge in Gaza, if it's in the general knowledge of the armed forces, 10,000 civilians of this category we are discussing, they are still held captive or still arrested just for this purpose, and it's there in their cantonments with their armed forces, and they are being made to wear the uniform, and the camera is fixed on their head, and asked, they're handcuffed at their back, and they're asked to march in front of the soldiers. I think it would be very hard for any sane person to accept that the spokesperson of the Israeli the government says that, they are, of course they would not confess that, and of course they would say that they would investigate it because they are the member of the United Nations, and they cannot openly admit that. But that's their strategy, that's their operational procedure which they are following, and they probably would keep following it, despite the fact that it has been discovered and disclosed by the ICC and some of the human rights organizations. But they are quite careless, as I said, that there were 42 Security Council resolution, but Israelis are being protected by their protectors.
Very important aspects. Dr. Khan, I'll come back to you to take your deeper view regarding those also. Let me once again proceed to Mr. Awan. Mr. Awan, when we talk about this possibility, what's your understanding? Could there be any sort of a substantial investigation into these allegations within the Israeli army, if they say that their policy is not to use human shields?
I am not convinced about these things. A country which is openly violating the international laws, they don't accept anything. There is no rule of law. They don't accept the United Nations Security Council. They don't accept the ICJ. They don't accept any rule. And how they will conduct these investigation?
So there is no possibility of that.
I don't think.
Okay, so there is the BBC reports that the Israeli military has told them there are 15,000 terrorists which have been killed since 7th of October. So when we look at the number which has been released by Gaza's health ministry, that stands now at 40,005. So the world at large knows that this number is basically of those innocent people in Gaza. So if we divide that, subtract 15,000 which has been told by the Israeli military to BBC, so 15,000, would you consider such a huge number to be terrorists alone?
No, it is not possible. You know who is a terrorist? Who is occupying the Palestinian land? Who is making their new settlements? Who is pushing the Palestinians out of their homes? Who is a terrorist? They are the oppressed people. Palestinians are the oppressed people. They are not the terrorists. They are struggling for their survival. They are struggling for their independence. They are struggling for their free land.
But this particular sharing of the figure on the part of Israeli military, terming those 15,000 people as terrorists, is the acceptance of the fact at least they have killed 15,000 people. So whatever the number is being reported by Gaza's health ministry, although it stands much lower, but as far as the figure itself is concerned, it's quite considerable and a huge one.
Yes, yes.
So isn't it a manifestation of the acceptance, a proof that they have accepted that they've killed 15,000 people at least?
Of course. They have confessed there's 15,000 people they have killed, at least.
Dr. Amna, what's your understanding regarding as to, is there any possibility regarding a substantial investigation happening?
Israeli claim may be anything, they can claim anything. But we have seen not only the Palestinian ministry, but the whole world has seen, because clips are open. They were not terrorists because they were unarmed civilians running here and there. They were displaced 5 times from their homes. And the places which were declared as humanitarian safe, they were targeted again and again. First pamphlets were dropped, and then people were directed to move to that area, and when they were concentrated there, they were bombed. It means that it is all planned. And moreover, you see that in 40,000, more than 1/3 were the children. And then 1/3 were the women. So it means that only the male 15,000 were terrorists, and rest of the population, women and children, they were not terrorists. But we have seen that they have bombed on children hospitals, on incubators,
on schools.
On schools. Where were the terrorists? In schools there were terrorists. They claim that everybody in Gaza that supports Hamas is the terrorist, and in their language, all Palestinians are human animals or the terrorists. So we cannot accept their claim, because that is not legitimate and that is not justified under any international law and the ground realities.
Okay, so here is another major development, Dr. Amna, when the US has approved $20 billion weapon package once again for Israel. We've been seeing since 7th of October, there have been a number of times the US has been approving the aid for Israel. Now, at the same time, it keeps on pushing for a ceasefire deal in Gaza to end the conflict there. So specifically talking about this approval of $20 billion, right now, where would that particular move by the US lead this conflict?
Jawad, I think that United States has exposed itself. Everybody knows that they are not interested in implementation of the UN Security Council resolutions. If they were the last resolution which was which approved ceasefire, if that was not binding, then why they rejected first three? If it was not binding, then it should happen earlier. Why they were vetoing again and again? It means that it was binding and US was not interested to implement. Same is the case with last truce agreement, and it was signed and it was almost declared to be declared, but US was not accepting, and they were saying no, Hamas should have an agreement on the terms of Israel, that they can violate truce anytime, they can attack anytime when they claim that Hamas is there, their terrorists are there. It means that US has exposed. Actually, in IR we say that that is hegemonic stability. Hegemonic stability is a term when hegemon makes certain sacrifices to maintain stability, to make its position as a hegemon, but US has lost that position. Yeah. You see that China has entered because there was a gap, now Russia is entering because there is a gap, and US lost its stability, capacity, stability. And hegemonic stability and capacity to bring stability, because it has attributed all its energies to the security of Israel, not the whole region.
Considering that particular phenomenon, trying to bring in stability through hegemonic stability, that phenomenon. So what sort of sacrifices presumably could have been manifested when it came to the US?
Yeah, because
were there any sacrifices the US could have really made?
Yes, US should sacrifice its all love and affair with Israel. They should attribute, the policymakers should attribute their energies to bring stability in all the countries, balancing their power, improving
there has
trade.
Been shuttle diplomacy going on. A number of times the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been flying to the Middle East.
But we all know, we all know that those trips were not to support Palestine, not to stop genocide there, but it was to convince all other countries of the region not to attack on Israel, not to enter into war, not to support Palestinian, let them die and let them fight their own war. The all diplomacy was attributed on that trade. So US was having this chance, as Dr. Khan just mentioned, John Masheimer. He says that we actually gave the room for other powers to enter, and China is giving, giving their way, and they are making their strong presence. They have sponsored Iran, Saudi rapprochement, and at the same time they have instituted the rapprochement among different factions of Palestinians, in more than 21. And they were entering because United States failed to implement its hegemonic stability capacity there. So I think that this aid which they have sanctioned exposed United States and its designs, that they are using Israel as their outpost to establish their military hegemony here.
Dr. Amna, I'll come back to you, take your deeper understanding regarding as to what could be the likely prospects of the resumed talks now which are happening in Doha. Of course, the Hamas officials have said that they are not interested to enter into further negotiations. The implementation with seriousness of that earlier proposal by US President Joe Biden, a three-phase proposal. Dr. Jamil Khan, this sanction of $20 billion weapon package to Israel at this particular point in time, at the same time, the US keeps pushing for a ceasefire deal. Also, how do you look at the sanction of this $20 billion as a weapon package?
That's just to demonstrate and just to show their solidarity of the United States with the Israel, because as I was mentioning in the previous segment about the standing ovation given to a war criminal in the Joint Congress, right? And that shows about the support of the various important institutions of the United States. And I've already quoted you the book Israeli Influence, written by John Shammer. So because of which their media, their Treasury Department, their State Department, their Congress, and I have a fairly good understanding about the mechanism, how it is done. But because of the paucity of time, I'll just restrict myself to this elaboration. Now, that is one part, and why it was, you see, there are about 200 tons of bombs and explosive has already been transported, even more. So this is a consistent and continuous support. And at this juncture of time, was the three-phase Joe Biden peace plan is being advocated by them on one side, and on the other side, the Israel is being given $20 billion worth of aid in arms and ammunition and other things, and all kind of supports and standing diversion. So it is a contradictory act by the United States. And that, what does it demonstrate? I have a little hope this time that they're showing some seriousness, because the intelligence agency of Israel, the hostage chief who is the negotiating the hostages, and the defense the component, they are coming for they agreed to come for the negotiation. But the conditions which Hamas had almost accepted all the conditions which was given in three phase, because it was well negotiated by Qatar, Egypt, and United States. That could be workable if they were serious about it. But Netanyahu said, we'll not accept it. And he came up with some other conditions, like he would keep the Israel would keep its presence, the Israel would keep its checkpoint. Even those who would return to Palestine, their own home, Palestine, they would be searched, they would be screened by Israel. So Israel, like West Bank, they want to have a full control, even higher control than the West Bank. So that condition, obviously, Hamas is not it is not acceptable to Hamas. The other point is, we've been talking about Israeli allegation of the terrorist. Fine enough, but there is a definition. There are there are debates in the United Nations and in the world community, who is terrorist and who is the freedom fighter. Now, if an occupier keeps occupying the territory of any group or any segment of society, any part of the world, that society or that group, and now in this case, Palestine, which is admitted and accepted conflict of the world, if they resist and if they fight back for getting their occupied land, or for staying within the whatever place is they are having control of, so they would be known as the freedom fighter. And the United Nations General Assembly resolution 2649 gives them all the rights, and it's in its debate that they can fight back, they can use all tools available to them to resist the occupying forces. So those things are documented. But again, the question boils down to one thing, that who is going to really respect the international law where Israel has its interest, and Israel.
Your point, well, Dr. Khan, a last point as to your understanding regarding, are there any sort of prospects regarding these particular ceasefire talks which have resumed in Doha? Of course, the Hamas officials already declared that they won't be attending these particular talks. They want the implementation of already agreed upon that proposal by Joe Biden. So what's the point, firstly, of having these talks without the participation of that Palestinian resistance group? Even if they are carried on, is there any prospect? Could there something substantial that might transpire out of these?
There is a different angle. At this time, there might be, because there is a deterrence to Israel and the United States in particular, that Iran is all set and prepared to retaliate and avenge the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh on its sovereign territory of Iran. So that in order to avoid that situation, United States is trying its best and probably has convinced Israel that, look, if it escalates, it's detrimental to the interest of Israel as well as to the interest of United States, because of its bases, because of its interest. And that's the reason that you feel such an intensified deployment of the warships and all other troops which they are sending around. just to deter Iran not to retaliate. So it's the same thing, like, once the Palestinian new attack by Israel was unleashed after 7th of October, all the Arab neighboring countries whose population were really quite frustrated, they were really, not only convinced, pressurized to stay neutral and stay quiet. And that's why even OIC could not really pass a stern and a strong resolution except for condemnation. OIC could not even impose a bilateral and multilateral sanction on Israel, what to talk of putting up any resistance. So from that standpoint, it's in the interest of United States that the conflict should not escalate, because if it escalates, it would be multi-pronged attacks and counterattacks, which would be detrimental to the interest of the United States. And therefore, I'm having a...
Okay, Dr. Khan, is that the United States of America is trying to pressurize Israel this time around during these negotiations to accept an already made proposal by Joe Biden of those 3 phases leading towards a ceasefire?
Once it comes to the full-blown war between Iran, its proxies, and other countries against Israel, yes, the United States, in its own judgment and assessment, and the indicators are there on ground, the dots can be connected, and we can draw the analysis that yes, the United States is interested, because it really compromises its overall geopolitical interest in this region. Therefore, it's...
Dr. Jamil Khan, former ambassador, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. In the studio, Mr. Awan, please go ahead quickly.
I think that the situation is very bad and is getting worse. The way how the American has deployed the forces in the Middle East, they are preparing for the bigger war. They are protecting the Israel, and these peace negotiations are just gaining time. While they are making the negotiation in Doha, Israel has made the air strikes today, and they have the ground offensive.
Your point is well taken, Mr. Zamir. Ahmad, Awan, foreign affairs expert. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we were joined by Dr. Amna Mahmood, foreign affairs expert. Dr. Amna, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.